Following lesson is linked to Learning Outcome 1, Listening and Speaking, and addresses the assessment standard that requires learners to make inferences and judgments and motivate with evidence. Learners should be able to interact in group discussions by expressing own ideas and opinions, and listening to and respecting those of others, while engaging with a range of issues such as inclusivity and power relations, and environmental, ethical, socio-cultural, and human rights issues.
Welcome to the next lesson in our series on your right to speak. In this series, we have seen how information can be used as evidence and how including or excluding certain information can change the way situations appear. In this lesson, we will be looking at judgments and how our assumptions about people and situations can influence the way we see things. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define objectivity and subjectivity, explain how bias can influence the way we judge people and situations, list key ideas to think about when making judgments. To illustrate how we make judgments based on incomplete information and how our judgments are influenced by our prejudices, have a look at the following situation and answer the questions as we go along. What do you think about this man? Do you think he's a nice person? What do you think he's doing in this photo? And now? And what do you think now? Were your judgments about the situation correct? Did your first impressions of this man and what he was doing turn out to be accurate? So, own up. Did you think the man was up to no good? Did you assume he was going to mug the woman? How did you feel once the full story was revealed? What factors played a role in how you made a judgment about the situation? The example we have just seen was a good example of how we can all be biased in making judgments. Because we weren't given all the information in the beginning, our own prejudices, stereotypes, and past experiences played a role in making a judgment about what sort of person the man was and what he was likely to be doing. Whether we mean to or not, we often decide things about people based on what they look like, what color they are, their religion or culture, or even whether they are male or female. When our way of thinking is based on our own personal point of view, this is called a subjective point of view. A subjective point of view is influenced by our own feelings, opinions, and beliefs. This is the opposite of an objective point of view. Judges in a court of law should make their decisions based on objective facts that are supported by evidence. They shouldn't let their own opinions or beliefs play a role in making a judgment, and they should also pay equal attention to both sides of the story so that they can make an informed assessment. When we make a judgment that is based on our own feelings, opinions, or beliefs, in other words, a subjective point of view, we call this bias. The definition of bias is judgment that isn't based on facts, but rather a judgment that is based on our own opinions and beliefs. I'm sure you will agree with me that in a perfect world, we would only make judgments based on facts. Unfortunately, though, we don't live in a perfect world, and bias often affects how we react to people in a negative way. One of the situations where bias can really hurt people is when people who are HIV positive are unfairly treated. For example, some HIV positive people have been wrongly dismissed from their jobs because their employers mistakenly believe that they put other people in the workplace in danger. To help us think about how stereotyping and prejudice could hurt someone or put them at a disadvantage, we went to chat to Claire Turnbull. What negative bias and discrimination do people with HIV experience?
Okay, society is still negatively biased towards people living with HIV and AIDS. This plays itself out in stigma and discrimination, which means that people living with HIV or AIDS suffer a lot in terms of ostracization, being kicked out of homes, families kicking them out, communities. And this means that often they're left to cope on their own. They don't have a support structure. Quite often they lose any financial support or shelter, food, etc. Sometimes if it's a woman and she's kicked out with her children, suddenly she's left to fend for herself as well as children without any kind of support. Often just the fear of being faced with stigma and discrimination means that many people won't even be tested, which means they don't know their HIV status. And this in turn affects society because it's increasing the spread of HIV.
Stereotypes and prejudice often mean that we don't pay attention to what is really going on. We imagine that all people from the same group will be alike in certain ways, instead of taking the time to get to know individuals and make judgments based on them, not the groups that they belong to. Worse still, people often make assumptions about other people based on limited information, which in turn leads to incorrect beliefs. Claire, how do false beliefs lead to unfair treatment of people with HIV/AIDS?
Okay, there's many false beliefs surrounding people who are living with HIV and AIDS. Some of those beliefs start with not being able to be near someone or touch somebody or share the same cutlery or crockery as someone with HIV or AIDS because you're afraid that you're going to get it. So that results in people being pushed aside or ostracized. Another false belief is that if you've got HIV, you deserve to get it. You've done something wrong or you've done something bad, you've been sexually promiscuous, you're a drug addict, anything like that. You get labeled with being a bad person. Whereas there's many different ways of getting HIV and AIDS and blame should not come into it. Another false belief is what we sometimes call othering, where people believe that it happens to other people. For example, it only happens to black people or to poor people or to gay people. HIV is not choosy. It doesn't pick according to race or culture. Anybody can get HIV.
If we want to make fair judgments based on a knowledge and understanding of all aspects of an issue, we need to be able to put our own biases and prejudices aside and listen carefully to others. How can we be better, more supportive listeners?
I think it's very important as a counsellor or just anybody in general society to be non-judgmental and to be objective. You don't know the circumstances surrounding an event or surrounding how a person got HIV and AIDS in the first place. You don't know what they are going through, how they're coping, what sort of situation or support that they have. So it's very important to be open-minded and to not blame that person and not be judgmental. You know, everybody needs support, everybody needs love and caring. And I think as a society as a whole, we need to see more of that and less judgment and less blaming.
That sounds like good advice to me. Not just for interacting with people who are dealing with HIV, but for interacting with people generally. Claire has made it quite clear how our bias towards people can have a negative effect on them. And from this, we can see how important it is to try to be objective when we are listening and speaking to other people. Let's review the main points of what we have covered so far. We can overcome bias and make fair judgments by keeping an open mind, listening to the whole story before making a judgment, asking questions to help us understand the situation better, remembering that everybody needs help and support at some time in their lives. Think back to the scenario at the beginning of the lesson. It is so easy to make poor judgments based on limited information, and it is tragic when these ill-informed judgments lead to discrimination. I hope this lesson will encourage you to find out all the facts before you make a judgment and to make a judgment based on objective information rather than prejudices, stereotypes, and bias. To practice the skill of making a fair judgment, it's time for today's task. Should people be allowed to adopt a child of a different race? Write a paragraph in which you state and defend your position. To complete this task and to make sure that your judgment is fair and objective, keep the following points in mind. Try not to be influenced by your own bias. Investigate all aspects of the matter. Do some research and speak to informed people so that your judgment is based on facts. Try to think about what will be best for everyone involved, the potential parents and children waiting to be adopted. I hope you will enjoy doing some research to help you make an informed judgment. If you enjoy defending your opinion, be sure to look out for our next lesson, where we will find out more about the skill of debating. See you then.